Revisiting Liberty City's imposing skyscrapers, Vice City's pastel-soaked metropolis, and San Andreas' incredibly varied terrain should have been a total thrill. And in some ways, to be fair, Rockstar's GTA Trilogy Definitive Edition did scratch some of the itch it was supposed to, but more often than not, it just all came tumbling down. I'm sure by now you've seen the screenshots, watched the videos, and maybe even headed over to Metacritic to voice your frustration, but I thought it was high time to rank the 10 biggest WTF moments from this trilogy, so without further ado, I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and this is the GTA Trilogy Definitive Edition, the 10 biggest WTF moments. Number 10, seeing the full picture. Okay, first up we've got some positivity, or at least some semblance of positivity, because not everyone is going to think of this as a pro, and that's kind of why it's worth talking about. As you may know, Rockstar made the decision to remove the foggy look from the original 3 games for this remaster and increase the draw distance massively thanks to the new technology. And while this is technically speaking anyway, quote-unquote better, it is certainly jarring if you spent hundreds of hours in those original games only to come across to these and see just how clean and open everything is. Especially when you're booting up San Andreas. The map there is nowhere near as big or as winding as you remember, and if you get high enough in the sky, you can see all of it. And like I said, if you're one of the hardcore players, seeing the world in this way is just a little bit trippy. Again, it's not necessarily bad, and this one more than the others is definitely subjective, but it certainly does alter the atmosphere of each game in a really noticeable way. It's a choice, put it that way. And that's because even though the fog was definitely a technical limitation at the time, that limitation became part of the art styles of these games. The developers clearly didn't view the fog that way though and just took it out because now, hey, they definitely could thanks to next-gen machines and PC. Number 9, that frame rate. The internet at the moment is rightly confused how a 20-year-old game like GTA 3 can run so bad on the PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X, and PC. And don't even get me started on the Nintendo Switch version, like that should be such a great platform for these games, you know, being able to pick up San Andreas on the go while you're on a commute or something, but the Nintendo Switch version is a nightmare. Still, for the Switch, players at least expect some compromises to be made for that system. The Xbox Series X and PS5 though, not so much. The fact that a game released in 2001 can chug along like you're streaming it on a dial-up connection or something is just totally unacceptable in what should be the definitive editions. It's not unplayable by any means or anything like that, it's just the fact that even in the fidelity and performance modes, you can't get that stable frame rate that you'd expect from remasters of games this old. It's not like they're Resident Evil 2 level remakes. This is something that Rockstar absolutely needs to pay attention to, because it's not like players can just pick up the older versions and have a more stable time. Speaking of, number 8, removing the originals from sale. It's been weeks since they announced this and I still can't get over this. You see, in the run-up to the Definitive Edition, Rockstar announced that they were going to be removing GTA 3, Vice City, and San Andreas from the PlayStation and Xbox storefronts. That, in effect, means that the Definitive Editions are the only game in town, as you can't readily accessible buy the older versions anymore, even though you could just a month ago. You want to own those games now, you either had to have bought it before they were delisted, or you're going to have to pick up an old PS2 copy and buy a PS2 if you don't have one. Now I want to clarify that this would have been an issue even if the definitive editions were, good. But the fact that Rockstar removed these perfectly fine versions of the games from stores and then replaced them with this £55 definitive edition, it just sucks. Now this is just me theorizing, of course, but doesn't it make you think that they thought the originals were too tough of a competition to go head to head with? I mean, how many players over the weekend would have seen the mess of the definitive edition doing the rounds and then looked literally a bar down the storefront to see the older versions far cheaper and just bought those instead? Again, I'm not saying that was the motivation to remove it, but the optics are bad all around. Number 7, so many broken missions. Glitches and bugs in general gameplay are one thing. They're not great, of course, and I'd prefer to not have them, but they're not too egregious if all of the story missions and the bones of the game actually work as intended. I mean, it's not a complete deal breaker to see a flying car now and again. That was what happened in the originals as well. With this in mind though, it is rather disheartening to realize that the Definitive Edition comes packed with a bunch of missions that just seem plain old broken. In fact, they can be so bad that they're stopping players from progressing in the stories at all, which is it's just not a good look, is it? Many gamers on social media have noted a bunch of different missions that block them from progressing to the next point unless they either shut the game down and reboot an old save or try to reload from a previous checkpoint. And I know reloading from a previous checkpoint might not seem so bad, but if this is happening all the time on top of everything else, it's just ultimately, again, and I keep repeating myself, something that shouldn't be there in these supposed definitive editions. And what makes it worse is that this only fixes certain missions. Others don't quite have that same luxury. One that was doing the rounds came from a mission called Copland in Vice City. Here in this mission, playable character Tommy is supposed to plant a bomb and then run away, but a glitch meant that they got caught in the explosion every single time and just died, which would be, piss funny if it was happening just randomly once, but the fact that someone got stuck on this over and over again must have been infuriating. I'm pleased I haven't got to that bit yet. Number 6, PC problems. Immediately after the launch of the GTA trilogy, there were widespread reports from PC players that they couldn't boot up the game that they just bought. That's because the Rockstar Games launcher, which is required to actually play the GTA trilogy, was down for maintenance on the day that the game launched, and then the game itself was taken off sale so people couldn't buy it and get annoyed to remove apparently some of the code. And this wasn't just like a couple of hours thing either. It took around 3 days for the game to be put back on sale and for people to actually be able to properly buy it and play it. And the thought of PC players buying this game and then immediately being locked out of it and just having to see all of the memes and glitches roll in a line, it's just disappointing, isn't it? Number 5, the floating bridge. Alright, so here's something ultra specific. In San Andreas, there is a whole ass bridge which just doesn't load in. Now, I will hold my hands up and admit that seeing CJ walk across the water like he's some reincarnated Jesus Christ is funny as all hell, but wait, guys, come on. This is an entire bridge that has just gone invisible and is resulting in people just walking across the water, or in some cases, walking straight into the sky because it glitched out even more. Like if you watch footage of people trying to cross the bridge, sometimes they get along just fine, they're walking on nothing, but they get along the bridge. Other times it kind of freaks out and they kind of have to go further up and over, and it looks intensely weird. It's a strange one, and I don't know how anyone on the development team missed a whole ass bridge. Number 4, the invisible walls and destructible fences. As you probably know, baked into the DNA of GTA is the idea of swift getaways and escaping the cops in vehicles. Some of the best times that you have in these games are acting like you're Ryan Gosling in Drive or something, swerving through traffic, going through shortcuts and doing mad jumps to get away from the police. In the GTA 3 Definitive Edition though, the developers want to make this as tough and as unfair as possible, it seems. And that's because one of the big mission ruiners is getting stuck on invisible geometry. You can be driving around town having a good old time and then suddenly crash headfirst into a concrete pillar that you didn't see because it was invisible and you just thought you were on a piece of road. That's one thing, but the games will make you distrust fences in particular. See, during the game you can knock these fences down with your car and make your own road to get around the city. Or at least you can theoretically. And that's because while the animation will play to see the fence destroyed, often the restriction still stays in place, like there was an invisible second fence behind it or something. Again, this can ruin getaways, and if you get stuck on this fence, can leave your car completely totaled and ruin the whole mission. And speaking of cars, number 3, the flying cars. Now, flying cars have been on every fan's fantasy wishlist for years, at least until they did come around properly in GTA 5 Online and just ruined everyone's day by flailing down rockets from above. And don't get me wrong, there was a way to fulfill this fantasy in a way in the original games as well with the flying car cheats. But those aren't the type that we're talking about today. No, numerous flying NPC cars have been spotted in the GTA 3 remaster. Now, as alluded to earlier, sometimes things like this did happen in the original version of the game, but the fact that we're talking about it now is a testament to just how botched the definitive edition is, because we don't know what is a cheeky little wink to glitches that we know and love, and what's just a proper bollock up on the part of the developers. Like, was this intentional? Was this a loving little nudge to past fans? Or was it just another in the long line of many glitches and bugs that are not supposed to be there in the first place? I honestly don't know, but it's still hilarious to see them getting pointed out either way. Number 2, the wonky character models. The problems with the GTA Definitive Edition have been nicely summed up by the absolute state of some of the character models that have been doing the rounds online. It's a weird phenomenon. Half of the characters look really good, how you would want them to look in an updated remaster like this, and some of them just look like total abominations. Well, that's been a bit harsh. Some of them also just look like Nintendo Mii characters. When it comes to the facial design of some of the side characters, a lot of them look worse than they did 15 or 20 years ago. It shouldn't have been that hard, and again, it just feels rushed to have these Stretch Armstrong-style characters come out of the woodwork, because how did they get it so wrong? Again, how did someone sign off on this and think it was a good idea? And number 1, the rain. Finally, we have this. It's hard to mess up rain, or at least you would think so, especially in a remastered game, but it seems like Rockstar have done just that. That's because the downpour in your favorite GTA games will make your eyes feel like they're coming out of your skull. And who really knows what exactly went wrong to make the rain look so garish and jagged, but they need to sort it out ASAP, because it's given me personally a bad head. It shouldn't be painful to play or this disorientating whenever rain falls in-game, especially not when that happens quite a lot in GTA 3 and San Andreas. Now I know, it might sound like I'm making a mountain out of a molehill here, especially by putting it as number 1. I mean, it's just rain, right? But no, this thing gets particularly bad the more you play it for some reason. And it's even worse if you happen to be on a bicycle or going in a car at speed, because you just get totally disorientated, end up crashing, and then dying. Your car's exploding, you're in the flames, all because of some rain. And then there's the flying. Oh man, does the rain look bad when you're flying. In San Andreas, raindrops change direction suddenly depending on the height of your plane, and they even clip behind the horizon at points as well. It's just a mess of soggy, jagged pixels, and I was so pleased over the weekend that it wasn't just me having such a problem with it. So that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. What are you making of the GTA trilogy, and are there any WTF moments that you've noticed that you think deserve a spot on this list? And also, are you enjoying it? I've got to admit that even in spite of all of this dumb stuff that definitely shouldn't have been there, I'm kind of having a good time. It's just that I would probably also have had as good of a time if I just, bought them on PlayStation 2. Either way, let us know, and while you're down there, could you please give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to WhatCulture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't, though, I've been Josh. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.